30 Years a Watchtower Slave, Chapter 18, entitled Bringing Zone 1 into Line. The first subheading is entitled Division, Cliques, and Jealousy. No, we're not familiar with that in the Jehovah's Witness world. Well, back then in the 30s, this seemed to be a big problem amongst the witnesses. There were division, cliques, and jealousies regarding the old timers that came in during the Charles Russell days. Then there were those newcomers, the anointed, who came in supposedly at the last minute. And then there was the great crowd. So we had these three factions of Jehovah's Witnesses fighting between each other in the congregations. What kind of class are you? At the same time, congregations were fighting for territory. They wanted more and more territory. So what happens when you have a large territory? Well, it doesn't get work that often. And you got to do a lot of driving, a lot of wasted time going across the county. So the author's job was to break these congregations up into smaller territories and have them focus and concentrate on their home territory, and then follow those 7 steps of brainwashing and training. The next subheading is entitled An Ultimatum. So now it was time for the judge to give the author a taste of his own medicine. He says that it was about 11 o'clock at night one day. A company servant from one of the congregations that he was serving brought him a mail letter to him from the judge himself, Brother Rutherford. It was a 22-page typewritten letter. He doesn't go into too many specifics, but he was commanded to give a yes or no answer. Was he going to cooperate or not? Now, of course, the brothers who caught this letter and delivered it were pretty in shock to learn what was going on with this letter. I guess they had never seen the iron fist of the society. But he had seen this type of action before. It wasn't new to the author, so he continued on. There was also spies on him to see how he would react to this letter. And once they saw and were satisfied that he was carrying on as normal, well, they left and went their way. The author says he had only one goal, and that was to make this zone a theocratic zone, and no one was going to stop him. The next subheading is entitled The Spy System Extended. So Judge Rutherford was getting up in years, and so there were these young bucks attempting to make their mark in the organization after the judge had died. That way they could have their spot in the theocratic organization. And these people considered the spy system as a matter of necessity. In order for things to work, the witnesses had to be mediocre. Brilliance or independence was not permissible. It had to be nipped in the bud wherever it showed himself. There is no independent thinking allowed. So that's why they considered the spy system necessary to survival. Weed out those who start thinking for themselves. The author mentions that he was basically in hell. His thoughts troubled him all the time. His conscience tortured him. He tried to get out, but every time he almost made it out, something seemed to pull him right back in, and then he was in hell all over again. So at any rate, the spy who was looking out after that letter was delivered must have given him a nod of approval. He ended up telling him, "I like what you're doing, just keep your nose clean." So he continued to go through the motions. The next subheading is I am a faithful slave. So the time period we're looking at is 1939, and he was set to make the necessary changes of the zone. So he went to work in true Watchtower fashion. So the first go around and visiting all the congregations, he basically chose not to do anything, gave them pep talks, and said that they were needed in order to establish the new theocracy. Second go around is when he starts breaking up these congregations, downsizing their territories. The brothers and sisters did not like that very much, and so he had a real problem on his hands. The smarter, older witnesses knew exactly what was going on, but that's what he was going through in his first zone number 1. The next subheading is creating an issue. Man, it seemed like the author was a master at creating these issues. But a new congregation was formed in the city of Hubbard, Ohio, and he realized that they had always been opposed to the witnesses. So he persuaded that congregation, who had always met in a private home, to rent a hall in Hubbard as a Kingdom Hall. Once they did that, they started to advertise the meetings. And then long after that, they started parading up and down the streets with sandwich boards that said none other than the provocative message: religion is a snare and a racket. That's where it got started. So how do you think the nice, friendly citizens of Hubbard, Ohio like that action of the witnesses? Yeah, they didn't take too kindly to that. So there were mobs, there were arrests, and so this was the issue that was created. Eventually, they started putting up signs on the highway just outside of where their rented Kingdom Hall was at, and that created even more upheaval with the people. Eventually, it got word that the city of Hubbard was un-American, and you can only imagine the firestorm that caused. Yet somehow the author always seemed to be one step ahead of everyone else. He always had these pamphlets that were printed before this issue was caused. That way, as soon as there was action taken against the witnesses, the local congregations there were busy distributing this propaganda that was going on of persecution against the witnesses. So this guy was really sneaky. He knew exactly what he was doing. And once he started winning some of these cases in court, well, Judge Rutherford was really pleased in that. But these new and upcoming Bethelites who were preparing to take over after the judge didn't take too kindly to the author. The next subheading is entitled Rough Stuff. And at the convention in New York City in 1939, there was some incidents going on there. People didn't appreciate what was happening with the witnesses. The city was overcrowded, overfilled, and there was a little bit of violence that happened there. So anyways, the next subheading is commended and warned. So of course the judge was ecstatic that the author was able to create these issues, take the city to court, and win these battles. But that wasn't enough for them, because in this religion nothing is never enough. You won't ever get a talk saying that you're doing good, you're doing enough, keep it up. You may have something to that effect, but there's always the talk saying how you can always do more in the kingdom work. And so that hasn't changed any over the years. The next subheading is entitled Victory at Hubbard. So the author again tells us the background information on what was going on in this little city in Ohio and how they stirred up the people in that town with these sandwich boards and these protests and these propaganda pamphlets. And so, of course, the witnesses were taken to court. And it really, I'm not going to go into too many details because it's lengthy, and I think this video is already getting pretty long, but it just shows how crooked and nasty the witnesses were when it comes to these court cases. And really, the next subheading is one of the more famous subheadings in the witness world: Martin versus Struthers. So again, an issue was raised in the town of Struthers, Ohio. They had a city ordinance of no bell ringing on Sunday morning. Witnesses are going to see that as a way of persecution against their work. When the church bells ring in the morning, why can't they? So again, a lengthy, detailed recollection of what was happening with this town and this court case that went unbelievably all the way to the Supreme Court about door knocking. So anyways, the next subheading is entitled "The Society Safeguards Its Interests." Oh, they're always going to safeguard their interest, which actually comes out to money. CYA, cover your ass. And this is exactly what the Watchtower was doing. If you can't stand the heat, get your ass out the kitchen. And that's what the Watchtower did exactly. As Pearl Harbor and World War II was on the horizon, they got rid of the zone servants because they were having a very authoritative status, a hierarchical arrangement there. And so they terminated that zone work, and they assumed position of absolute neutrality, not only with the world, but with their own people. It didn't matter that people were jailed in concentration camps and died for the truth. Watchtower was washing their hands. Basically, over the years, what they do is they say that this is a voluntary commitment that people make, when really it's the commandments of them that make people go to jail and end up in concentration camps and die for the truth. It's not that they came up with this stance of neutrality on their own. The Watchtower tells them that they should obey these things, even if it doesn't sound right from a human standpoint. So they leave the witnesses on their own. They take the high road and say sayonara. So to wrap up this chapter, the author has given us a picture of the workings of the organization during the early years of the theocracy, of 1938. He told us about the spies, the flunkies, the stooges, and all of the issues that were created in this Zone 1. Actually, a lot of the issues that you may have heard about in these court cases that Jehovah's Witnesses have taught about in their yearbooks and so on and so forth in these years, they all actually happened in his zone there in Zone 1 in the Ohio area. And they covered all this with the claim to be preaching the gospel, but really it was a religious organization bent on power and organization. So this is going to conclude this chapter. Please stay tuned for the next. Thank you for taking time to watch and listen to this presentation. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for the next chapter.